Good afternoon, everybody. Who believes that we will never materialize a quantum computer which is large, fault-tolerant, and capable of breaking today's modern cryptography? Can I have a show of hands? Who thinks that we will never create one? Okay. I'm not entirely sure why you're here, but please do stay. We're going to talk more about it. So everybody else believes that we will eventually get there. Who thinks that it will happen within the next 30 years? Okay, that's a reasonable show of optimism. 15 years. Okay, so that's a large contingent of the 30-year crowd. 10 years, keep your hands up. Okay, I like that. 5. I like it. And who believes that one already exists? Okay, we've got some spies in the crowd. So I'm David Joseph. I'm here from Sandbox AQ, and basically we put out this paper a few months ago to talk about this problem that I'm going to try and sort of summarize and gather together. And essentially, there is so much going on in quantum computing, in PQC, Post-Quantum Cryptography. There are enormous challenges that are precipitated by this sort of nebulous threat of quantum computers, where we're not entirely sure when they will turn up. And it is such an enormous problem that it is very difficult to conceptualize and think about where to even start. So I'm going to tell the story at a reasonably high level of how we get to where we are now and what we can do next. It really starts with Shor's algorithm. And okay, you could maybe go back to Feynman, who had this idea that if you want to simulate quantum systems, let's use other quantum systems. But Shor's algorithm in 1994, it's an exponential speedup, right? This is paradigm shifting for the problems that it affects. That's super duper. However, it only really affects finding periods, which is, it's basically long division. It is literally the stuff that you did with the little boxes when you're sort of like 10 or 11 years old. Now, I don't know how many of you use long division in your everyday lives. I don't use it particularly frequently. Unfortunately, the one use case for long division is breaking cryptography, right? Please do nitpick me if you have other really useful applications for discrete logarithm finding or long division. I'm happy to hear. The other algorithm is Grover's algorithm, so it's kind of like it's not as good. It's not paradigm shifting, but quadratic speedup is very nice. It's extremely widely applicable, right? Searching unsorted databases has applications in many different algorithms. And again, unfortunately, it weakens symmetric crypto. Now, it doesn't break it, it weakens it. So that's the sort of the background that we have. And so today, what I'm going to talk about more is the public key cryptography side of things. So here on the left, this padlock sort of represents symmetric cryptography, which is basically what we use for all of the bulk encryption. This refers to handshaking in the middle. So when we want to get properties like confidentiality, we want to make sure nobody's reading our data, or we want to get authenticity. So we want to ensure that whoever we are exchanging our keys with is the right person. This is where we use public key cryptography, which was just like absolutely mental that this thing even exists. I mean, if you go back sort of 70, 80 years, the idea that you could establish secrets with other people without even meeting them or without sharing any kind of a secret, people didn't even imagine that was possible. It's very, very cool. On the left, mainly affected by Grover's algorithm, and on the right, mainly affected by Shor. And this is what I'm going to focus on a little bit more today, because that's really where the greatest problem presents. And that's the bit in the white dotted box. So we need many problems for post-quantum cryptography. I haven't really touched on the current standards, which are RSA, elliptic curve-based cryptography, and they're all based on many of the same problems that are all broken by Shor's. But we need many, many, many types of post-quantum cryptography, and here is why. Who here was surprised when Peter Shor published his algorithm in 1994 and it broke all of current cryptography? Okay, we've got one person that was surprised here. I wasn't surprised because I wasn't born yet. But somebody wasn't surprised. I was reading a paper by Shamir the other day on permuted kernel problem for an identification scheme. And essentially, this was in the abstract, and I found this super interesting. The security of the new scheme depends on an NP-complete algebraic problem rather than on factoring, and thus it widens the basis of public key crypto, which has become dangerously dependent on the difficulty of a single problem, right? This was 1989. And this guy wrote RSA. So there's good news. There are many types of post-quantum cryptography, or so we believe, and they're based on, all of these cool different things. My favorite is lattices, like just repeating patterns of points in very high dimensional space, right? And if you can find the shortest distance between any two of those points, ka-ching, you decrypted everything. Unfortunately, it's actually very difficult to do that. You've got all of these sort of fancy things like isogenies and multivariate, very mathematical, very interesting, not my area. Hash-based cryptography is it's much more close to the symmetric stuff that I was talking about, so we think that Grover may be the best attack for that, so it's quite conservative. And then you've got code-based cryptography. Now, when it comes to code-based cryptography, this is based on the fact that it's very difficult to decode a random linear code, and that's super interesting because coding theory basically derives from looking into how can we transmit data securely. So I find it very, very interesting that actually this can be used to, in a cryptographic setting as well. So in principle, quantum computers can factor what we've currently got, and in principle, we have lots of candidates to replace it. So maybe the talk ends here. Unfortunately, it's not quite that simple. I'm now going to take a second or two to talk about quantum computers. There are many, many types of quantum computers. They're based on quantum optics, superconducting systems, topological systems, ion traps, quantum spin systems, ultra-cold gases trapped in sort of periodic patterns of lasers, right? There are so many different media that are currently being intensely researched to try and create the next generation of quantum computers that this says one thing. We are very, very far in some respects from creating these large fault-tolerant quantum computers, because if we had any clear favorites, the others would pretty much be out of the race. It is still wide open, this race, right? I'm sure not everybody here is impartial about which one of these systems is going to be the favorite, but that's not my area, so I'm happy to hear more. And the problems that we face when we're trying to build these things are extremely varied. So let's take qubit count. Everybody hears, somebody's come out with the latest paper, they've got, this many qubits, this person's got dozens of qubits. And actually, when we were writing this paper for Nature, I actually tried to build a figure of the different roadmaps in terms of number of qubits. And I couldn't, because it's absolutely absurd and impossible, right? It's not like comparing those previous systems I talked about. It's not like comparing apples and oranges. It's like comparing pineapples and bricks. Essentially, so D-Wave has 5,000 qubits in their latest version, right? Google's quantum supremacy experiment back in 2019 had about 53. IBM, I think, maybe nudging over 100. And then all these things go through peer review, and then everybody kind of, slings muck at each other about everything that they're doing wrong. It's very, very difficult. And these are the reasons why. There are so many metrics that you need to nail to build these large fault-tolerant quantum computers. Fidelity is an interesting one. A qubit, in its quantum state, is essentially like a point on a sphere. And when it interacts with the universe, when it's measured, it collapses to a 1 or a 0. And a single qubit gate is basically just trying to take that point on the sphere and move it to a different point. That's not very quantum though. We can get like, I don't know, like 99.99% fidelity on those, which means that, we'll get the right answer 99.99% of the time. But when you try and entangle these things, which is where you really get the quantumness from it, that fidelity, at least as of a couple of years ago, was about 99.5%, which still, it sounds high. Is it high? No. When you try and string together many, many, many of these gates, those errors, that 0.5% error, it propagates and it just destroys the chance of you getting anything meaningful out of the other side. And people, I think there's a series of 3 papers on improving fidelity of these 2-qubit gates just in Nature this year. So this is it. It's still a super hot area of research. This is before we get into coherence time. That's about manipulating the quantum states. But while your quantum processor is manipulating certain quantum states, the other ones it's got to keep somehow isolated from the entire universe, right? It's not as simple as it sounds. This is why when I did a lot of my research on D-Wave, it's very difficult to use long coherence times. Then you've got the qubit count thing, which is kind of like, that's just a function of everything else that you're kind of breaking over here. Circuit depth, that's another factor. What I'm trying to communicate, and that's before we're getting on to error-correcting codes, which is the notion that, okay, maybe we can create really nice qubits that perform as qubits should if we just kind of bundle maybe 100 or 1,000 of them together in a very clever way. So these are the problems that an enormous amount of very, very smart people are trying to work on right now and develop solutions for. So this is very difficult. So what do the people that actually work on these things think? Let's go back to the question that I opened with. Professor Michele Mosca of the IQC in Waterloo, every year he puts together a survey of about a few dozen of the world's leading quantum researchers, and he asks them, one of the questions he asks them is, when is a large fault-tolerant quantum computer capable of factoring RSA 2048-bit semi-primes? And he asked them on for different time frames with a reasonable level of granularity. And okay, so let's say that you are looking to develop new drugs, or maybe you're looking to do one of these other applications like improve bus routes or something. Maybe this is the data point that you're interested in. Because within 15 years, of those 46 people, at least 28 thought that there was an even or better chance that we'd have one within 15 years, right? So more than half thought that there was more than a half chance that we'd have them. But maybe if you are an information security officer, maybe those kinds of odds aren't actually very nice. Maybe if, 10 of those 46 people think that there's a better than 5% chance that this will be around in 5 years, maybe you find that a little bit worrying. And here's why you might find that worrying. So if you take away, like any data points from today, it's that people think that there is, a non-trivial number of experts think that there is a non-trivial chance that we will have these large-scale fault-tolerant quantum computers in a reasonably short period of time. So do we have time? No. If you are responsible for manufacturing long field life devices, so maybe this is military aircraft, maybe it's container ships, you're going to be putting in crypto hardware that may be responsible for authentication. And once you deploy these things, they can be expected to be operational in the field for 10, 20, 30 years. And if you want to pull those things back and you want to sort of, remediate the hardware, you want to swap it out, there is a very real economic cost to these kinds of decisions. So maybe it's nicer if you can actually pull that decision to have quantum-resistant cryptography into the present and save yourself costs in the future. Industrial control systems. Now, the idea that, industrial control systems have notoriously flaky cybersecurity. And the reason why is because these things take 20 years to design, 10 to build, and then people want them to remain up and functional for another 30, right? So the things that we've got now were around, people were starting to think about them back when Riveston, Shamir, and Edelman were cooking up their RSA algorithm. But the problem is, these things sometimes require about 99.99% uptime. That gives you a period of about 6 minutes per year to do your upgrades. And that's barely enough for a software patch, let alone ripping out your crypto hardware. So anyway, there's lots of very difficult conversations to be had there. Things need doing soon if you take that previous slide seriously. But it gets worse. This is the store now, decrypt later attack. So it's really very simple. It does what it says on the tin. Your adversary here, he sits there and he monitors public networks, or maybe even private networks that he's got a bit of access to. And all he does is he downloads your data, right? So let's take, for example, a TLS session as an example. He downloads the whole session, the handshake and the bulk encryption as well, and he puts them in his safe, and he waits. And in 5, 10, 15, maybe longer, whenever he's got access to his quantum operating system computer, whatever that is, he breaks the handshake, which is where the public key crypto is. And once he's broken the handshake and he's extracted your symmetric crypto keys, what he can do then is he doesn't have to do any hacking. He just decrypts the entire session. I hypothesize that the difficult part of this attack is going to be not the quantum part of it, not the actual factoring. I think the difficult part is going to be finding out what the targets are. There is so much data that you can look at, that you can extract and download and wait to crack, and you are only going to have a finite amount of quantum resources. I think that relative to the amount of targets, the quantum part is going to be easy. And that is a little bit scary because, I don't know, people are very good at finding good targets. So essentially, we have Mosca's theorem, right? So I promise he's a very good physicist. He's done lots of very complicated maths. And yet this may be his greatest legacy to us, this theorem. And he says, if migration time, x, plus security shelf life, y, is greater than time to compromise, z, you should be worried. And that's because, let's say this migration to PQC takes you, 5 or 8 years. And let's say you're a bank and you're required to keep your information secret for 5 years. Well, all of a sudden, if there's a break within 13 years and these quantum computers materialize, you're in trouble. But let's be real, there's many, many, many applications where we want confidentiality to remain for much longer than 5 years, right? Let's think about, pharma IP or, military trade secrets. Medical records we want to be preserved for a lifetime. If a diplomat from a conservative part of the world, if their HIV diagnosis is revealed, they can, that can be used to blackmail them. And so this is what you really need to be concerned about. And so if we look at this timeline, if you take the strategy, I call it the ostrich strategy, of burying your head in the sand, I give you 5 to 7 good years, right? I think you'll lead a very comfortable life for 5 to 7 years. Then you'll have trouble, right? And you're going to be sweating under the collar. Because this is extremely unknown. And if some of the predictions from a few slides previously come true, and if the very smart people working on developing these quantum devices actually materialize and deliver to these funding bodies what they've promised, things are going to move very, very fast. And once we get close to having blueprints for large-scale fault-tolerant quantum computers, there will be a frenzy of activity to build them. So who remembers New Year's Eve 2008? Nope. Okay. So everybody else was blind drunk. Maybe it looks a bit like this, but not for these researchers at Carnegie Mellon University. they released this vulnerability note on MD5. MD5 is vulnerable to collision attacks. And the overview says weaknesses in the MD5 algorithm allow for collisions in the output, and as a result, attackers can generate cryptographic tokens or other data that illegitimately appear to be authentic. And so this is what happens. From time to time, cryptography gets broken. You know, that's the way the world works. That's progress for you. And we have to act on it. Now, in 2012, Flame malware was identified. And once this malware had been fingerprinted and tested, it was found out that it had infected, thousands and thousands of devices around the world, particularly in the Middle East. And it was sort of hypothesized that maybe it had been around in the wild since about 2008. We don't know exactly when the MD5 aspect of it was incorporated, because it was an extremely large suite of malware that just went on and on and on, and 0 days galore and all the rest of it. But it caused these gentlemen quite a bit of angst. There they are inspecting their nice uranium enrichment centrifuges, and it was famously used in Stuxnet, which basically was an act of sabotage on the Iranian nuclear system. And one of the ways that this malware had operated is that the servers which were used to control the PLCs, which essentially ran these nuclear plants, were Windows. And this code had a signature which appeared to be authentic, and it appeared to come from Microsoft. Now, Microsoft did not write this code. It is malware. And what it did is it subverted trust in the Microsoft update servers. And this is a massive problem, because the reason Microsoft issue updates is because they want people to be safe. They want to release patches. And the idea is that these patches make you safer. So if all of a sudden people start going, "Ooh, I'm not so sure I'm going to install this latest update because it could be malware," this is extremely, extremely problematic. Now, the way that this particular example was done appeared to be more sort of client-side, which meant that it was very, very targeted. But in theory, this could have been used to push malware to enormous numbers of devices. And this demonstrates how a failure to transition from broken cryptography in good time can cause absolute mayhem. And the moral of this story is that people say that there's often an easier way of getting into a computer system than breaking the cryptography. And that is true until it's not. Eventually there comes a point where if breaking the cryptography is straightforward, somebody will do it, and it will be very, very problematic. And this is the thing. Another thing that people say is, okay, well, breaking cryptography, quantum resources will be very limited, but they're only going to be able to target a small number of handshakes to break, or it's very finite. But the point that I've just demonstrated is that if you find the weak link in the infrastructure, you can cause very, very serious problems for very, very many people. So do not take this for granted. So this was a little bit of a side anecdote to demonstrate to everybody that this stuff is not theoretical. It happens in the real world. Now, in part 2, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's being done about it. I'm going to focus a little bit more on what the US is doing about it. There are many, many efforts that are going on around the world. ETSI, the International Standards Organization, 3GPP. But I'm going to focus a little bit more on the US government. And PQC starts with standardization. Nist have already standardized 2 stateful hash-based signature schemes. Remember, hashes are that really conservative version. They can be used for authentication, but not for confidentiality. And these systems have been standardized. They are ready to go. And we think that the best quantum attacks on them are Grover, so that's not enormously problematic. But they are stateful. And what that means is that you have a counter. Every time you sign an application, every time you issue a signature, you must increment that counter. If you use the same counter twice for 2 different signatures, your scheme will break. And what that means is that this is appropriate for certain applications, like for example code signing or secure boot, where one might expect to only need to issue signatures, maybe a few times an hour at maximum. But for other applications, this doesn't really scale. If IoT or maybe server-side signatures for TLS for web applications, the risk is too high that you will duplicate signatures. So these things exist. They can be very useful, and this is good. PQC is on its way. But the big daddy competition is this the Nist Post-Quantum Cryptography competition, and it's very, very spicy, right? And I'm just going to take you through some of the drama over the last 5 years. And this is a basic little timeline. It was announced in 2016, so we were aware of the problem a little while back. Submissions happened in 2017, and cryptanalysis has continued over the past 5 years up until the present day. And Nist have recently made their latest statement, and we can expect to have the first standards out in maybe sort of 12 to 18 months, which is very good news. But we know which schemes will be standardized, which is fantastic. So at the beginning, there were 82 submissions. Of these, 69 were deemed complete. 26 progressed to round 2, 15 to round 3, and in the recent announcement, 4 are going to be standardized, and 4 are going to be facing a little bit more cryptanalysis. Now, the way that Nist whittled down these submissions is some of them were broken, some of them were just a little bit naff, and some of them were encouraged to merge because they were very similar, and so they could use the optimizations from one team and the optimizations from another and come up with something slightly better to reduce the amount of different things that you could write a paper on. And so this is what it looked like at the in round 3. So we had 7 finalists and 8 alternates. Now in white we've got the ones which are for confidentiality, so securing your making sure that nobody can read your data when you encrypt it. And the ones in yellow are for authentication. So these are digital signature algorithms. At the beginning of this year, a paper was released, and it broke Rainbow, right? This is based on multivariate quadratic equations. And the paper was entitled, "We Can Break Rainbow in a Weekend on a Laptop." So this was very, very bad news for the Rainbow authors because they'd been working very, very hard on this for the past 5 years. And then Nist released their announcement of what was going to happen. And wow, this was surprising. So first of all, Rainbow, obviously, out. Sphinx has been subbed in. Sphinx is based on hashes, so very, very conservative. We're happy with the security. Performance-wise, it's a little bit slow. So this has been subbed in, and this is ostensibly because Nist didn't want to just rely on lattices for final, for signatures. The only chem to be standardized for confidentiality is Crystal's Kyber. Classical McAleese did not make it through. This upset some people. I won't go into that, but please, anybody who loves deep tech drama, sign up to the PQC forum, right? It's highly, highly entertaining. And then shortly after this happened, oh boy, this is so exciting. Another paper came out, and Psych was broken. Wow. Now in this latest one, this was even worse than the Rainbow one, right? So the people who broke Psych, these cryptosystems are meant to take hundreds, maybe thousands of years to brute force them, to break. They solved this in about an hour on a single core computer running a SageMath script, right? That's a very bad look. So I don't think Psych will be progressing to any kind of standardization, but Isogenes is not necessarily dead in the water. And so one can think about 22 in terms of cryptanalysis as Psych and Rainbow both getting broken by a laptop in under a weekend, which is really quite phenomenal when you consider that this is the leading PQC process that has been ongoing for about 5 years with some of the world's greatest cryptographers all trying to get fantastic papers by breaking schemes, and we are now in 2022 and this stuff is still happening. It's very, very difficult. I'm going to touch on a couple of techniques that we recommend for precipitating this transition. And the first is to use hybrid mode. We want you to use one traditional algorithm and one PQC algorithm. And the point of that is it means that if one of them becomes broken, your cryptography is as strong as the strongest one, right? So if your PQC gets broken, then at least you haven't reduced your security. And if quantum computers turn up, then at least you've got your PQC there, right? This is not a long-term strategy, but this is the way that we recommend people begin to get going, right? Many people agree with this approach, some people do not, but this is certainly what I would suggest. And what's great is that the US government have said that this will allow you to keep your FIPS certification. So if you need to process federal information, then you need your FIPS certification. And what they say is that so long as the traditional part is FIPS certified, you keep your FIPS certification, right? So you can lob on any kind of crypto so long as the first part is traditionally FIPS certified. And the other thing that we want to really, really push is crypto agility. And this is the notion that you can build cryptography infrastructures that will allow you to be more agile. They will allow you to change your key lengths when your key lengths need changing. They will allow you to update or switch your cryptography when you prefer. Apart from anything, it means that if some cryptography gets fatally broken, it will allow you to switch that out very, very fast, and you won't need to wait around for third-party vendors. And then maybe even down the road, there are even cooler benefits you can get, like having this cool autonomy that allows you to optimize the cryptography cocktails that you're using for any particular application. And that's something which is just completely not possible in the modern architecture. So that's what Nist is doing. Nist is the standards organization. It's kind of their business to be standardizing stuff. But as we know, governments are not cohesive organizations. Are the US government taking their own medicine? Well, actually, they're not doing a bad job. I've been pretty impressed. So in January, they released this memorandum, which said chief information officers of major, of federal agencies need to, within 6 months, have identified all of their quantum vulnerable encryption and have submitted a plan for migration. Now, 6 months takes us to July, just gone. Have they done that? Well, I don't know. I think those timelines are maybe ambitious, would be charitable. However, that's not the point. The point is they are making it their chief information officers' problems. Right? They have to start acting and they have to start thinking about this. And this is so important because it is absolutely impossible to mobilize large organizations and private businesses if the government is not acting first and taking this seriously. Because if you are a foreign nation state adversary or any kind of adversary with large resources, some of the juiciest targets are going to be in federal government. So now I'm just going to take a few moments to say, okay, at a high level, what can we all do about this? We've come up with a 4-point strategy that we think that everybody can follow and everybody can start now, independent of standards. The first part is inventory. It is very difficult to change your cryptography algorithms if you do not know where they are, right? So what does that involve? You need to look at your data in transit. You need to monitor your public networks, right? You need to be looking at, you can look at packets, you can sniff them, you can work out from TLS headers what's going on. Maybe you need to zoom in and you want to scan local hosts and you need agent-based models to actually work out on a more granular level what applications are using what crypto. You need to check what crypto is not just being used, but is supported. So when, again, I'm using TLS as a representative example here, but a client will provide a series of ciphers that they support, and hopefully with an updated server, it will pick the best one. However, if a client supports some dodgy old crypto, and another server is introduced into the network that is not updated as it should be, you may then start using cryptography which does not meet the policies of your organization. You need to be looking closely at your legacy systems. Some organizations have servers running which are 20, 30 years old. And the reason they are still doing this is because they are extraordinarily difficult to update, but yet they perform important functions. So these things almost have to be done on a case-by-case analysis. Oh, and yeah, also data at rest. I mean, that's, it goes without saying. The second point is that you need to strategize. You need to start coming up with a plan. And to do this, you need to think about store now, decrypt later. What are going to be the easiest systems for you to transition, and what are going to be the most important and sensitive systems for you to transition? I would suggest that you start with the easiest ones that are the most sensitive. You want to build in crypto agility from the ground up and think about this the entire way through the process, because for a start you're going to have to, I would recommend that you use hybrid systems, but maybe you won't want to use hybrid systems in 5 or 7 years, and you want to drop those, the traditional part. Please do think about the whole future and build in this new, better architecture, which needs defining in and of itself as you're going forwards. And then there's the whole, the authentication issues of, okay, if you're going to be deploying cryptographic hardware in these industrial control systems or in these vehicles or whatever it is, think about what's the economic impact of having to push these fixes later on down the line. The third point is that you're going to need to trial your crypto. You want to be making sure that your systems don't crumble. Because for a start, if you're going to use hybrid crypto, then all of the PQC portion of it is overhead, because you're still keeping the classical part. If you're going to try fancy new crypto-agile architectures, then you also want to make sure that those go smoothly. And then the final part is obviously to execute and pat yourself on the back. And if you follow those first 3 recommendations, you'll have greater visibility of your networks on an ongoing basis. You'll have greater autonomy over your cryptography. You'll be able to make your own choices about what policies you want to use in your networks and with your data. You'll have a more agile and easier to update suite of algorithms and set of networks. And these first 3 points will result in you having a much more qualitatively secure system, right? So 1, inventory. 2, strategize. 3, trial it. And 4, execute on it. So here's one I made earlier. That's a line from Blue Peter, if anybody used to watch that. It's a British program. We've been running a partnership with SoftBank, and we wanted to basically go through some of these things and work out how does this actually play. We want to, do what we're recommending, and so I'm going to show you what we did, and I highly recommend everybody else goes off and starts doing this themselves. We found a use case that was relevant to their business case. We thought about an application where we had control over all of the crypto, so that we didn't have to depend on third-party vendors. We could mod it ourselves, and we came up with mobile VPN because we were working with their telecommunications branch. So we start off with a mobile VPN, and then we thought about, okay, what is it that we want to analyze? Well, there are different types of browsing behaviors, and we tried to categorize these. We thought, well, the main browsing activity falls into these buckets: social media, generic browsing, online gaming, and streaming. And they all have different TLS profiles. That means, lengths of time before you're cycling keys, session lengths, frequencies of brand new handshakes. The next step was to work out what it is that we actually want to measure. To start off with, we figured let's just try and get as much data as we possibly can, and then we can work out what's meaningful, what matters. So we want to look at the latency of the handshakes. Any kind of network statistics that a proficient network engineer can come up with that might matter. We want to look at the bandwidth of the application that you're looking at. You want to look at the CPU loads on the clients and the servers. You want to look at what's the proportion of connections that are, that are successfully being made. And then don't worry, we're not going to be doing too much graph watching today. But this is just some initial results. We thought, let's start by breaking stuff out by PQC family. Do the results look like they should do? Well, on the left you got communications. The ordering looks, pretty much sensible. On the right you've got latencies. Does that look sensible? Okay, yeah, roughly. Let's zoom in a little bit further. Let's look at these distributions on a slightly more granular level. Let's work out where we can put 99th percentiles. This is still latency and communications data. We had a look at, why don't we ramp stuff to failure? Let's really push our networks and our systems and figure out where does stuff break. And we plotted sort of the connection success rate against, the actual raw number of connections started. And we found that, actually, for example, structured lattices did really well up until about, 150,000 connections a second being initiated, maintaining over 90%. But something like unstructured lattices, which is a bit more of a conservative option, well, they might do okay at the beginning, but they really tail off pretty fast. And, it's a similar story for isogenies. So some of this stuff, sounds like it should be straightforward. We know that some systems perform worse on certain metrics. But the reality is, you need to know what this means for your systems before you can go around updating them. And so SoftBank have done it, and so can you. So in the first part, I sort of tried to draw together the PQC timelines, which are a little bit more firm, a little bit more concrete, the quantum computer timelines, which, there are more opinions on quantum computing timelines than there are quantum computing experts. We had a little look at, what is the US government doing? Are they making the right moves? How can organizations think about and use them as a beacon? Our own recommendations for you to follow, because it's all very well summarizing this stuff, but actually what people need is concrete advice to help them begin moving forwards. We're not suggesting these cybersecurity teams just drop what they're doing and start working full-time on the migration, but they need to start thinking about this. There need to be people in the organization whose problem it is and who need to start proselytizing to the rest of the organization and letting them know about this stuff. That's one of the big takeaways that we've learned from working with our colleagues at SoftBank, which is that these guys really want to know about this stuff. They want to learn what it means to be quantum resistant. They want to know how does cryptanalysis work. They've been asking us non-stop, how do we know that it's secure? And we keep being like, well, there are no attacks on it yet. And then, but believers, it's secure. Nist are looking at it. And then obviously, site gets broken and we go, well, yeah, unfortunately that's cryptography for you. But these guys are learning about it. They're teaching the other people in their organizations about it. It's super useful. And so they've started, we've started, and you can too. So please do take a look at the paper that we put out, which is meant to be like a concise summary of all of the different things that are going on across these two areas of incredibly cool deep technology. And yeah, take it back and share it with people. And yeah, thank you.